Hello, everyone. Welcome to Genealogy Adventures. I'm Brian Sheffy.
And I'm Danya Williams. I don't know what is going on with this today, but it is not working for me.
I'm sorry.
Oh my God. It's just like doing its own thing is crazy. But hi, friends. Hi, family. We've missed you.
We have indeed. As always, thank you so much for spending the next hour with us, however you're tuning in, and we have such a great show for you today.
Yes, we do. So let's get right into it. I want to talk to you guys about our show. Today we are talking about Black Loyalists. I realized that a lot of people didn't know what the Black Loyalists were. And basically what that is that during the American Revolution, there were a group of African Americans that were offered to fight for the British. And when they fought for the British, they would be able to get their freedom. That's the gist of it. And when they were able to get their freedom, if regardless of whether they won or not, they were just able to get their freedom. So we are actually talking to two descendants and a husband of one of the descendants about the Black Loyalists, and we're talking about how they what they're doing to honor them, what they're doing to recognize them, and just bring notice to who they are. So because you guys, y'all know how we go. We want to talk about everybody. We don't want to just talk about the same people for Black History Month. And that's what this is. This is our kickoff for Black History Month. So first, I'm going to introduce to you guys Kelley Bruce. Kelley Bruce joined the Black Loyalist Heritage Society Board of Directors in 2021. Not only as a direct descendant of Black Loyalists, she's also as a second generation member of the society. Her passion is tracking her genealogy before the Black Loyalists landed in Birchtown, Nova Scotia in 1783. Kelley brings a wealth of education and experience to the board. She is a graduate of Mount St. Vincent University in Business Administration and a graduate of St. Mary's University with diplomas in strategic planning, leadership, and management. Kelley's 35-plus year career spans across several federal government departments in Canada's Atlantic region, where she held various senior management positions. She retired in 2016. Her husband, John, is a senior civil engineer who retired after a very successful career spanning 38 years. Since retirement, John has spent long hours engaged in genealogy research, joining his brother Mike in a family project about 2 years ago. Research on John's own family has led to wanting to uncover the story of Kelley's family, descendants of Black Loyalists. Many hours have been spent researching documentation stored at the Black Loyalist Heritage Center. In addition to his research, John has volunteered his time in an advisory role to the Black Loyalist Historical Society to help wherever and whenever needed and to advance new initiatives as the Genealogy Research Center that is being Andrea Davis, who is a community builder, a natural leader, a strong communicator, and powerful champion for those who need to have their voices heard. She is a Nova Scotian born of Black Loyalist descent and a descendant of entries of the Book of Negroes. She has ancestral ties and relationships within the communities of Birchtown, Shelburne, and Black communities throughout Nova Scotia. Andrea has developed, implemented, and facilitated large-scale programs dedicated to supporting equity, inclusion, diversity, and human rights in the workplace, and her post-secondary education includes certifications in investigation science, policy, police studies, adjudication for administrative agencies, boards, and tribunals, and recognition of achievement in excellence and educating adults. Andrea understands the Black Loyalist Heritage Society is committed to discover, interpret, promote, and safeguard the history of Black Loyalists and their descendants, and to the advancement of universal recognition of Black Loyalists as a Native Canadian heritage community. So please welcome you guys, John.
Sorry.
And got something.
That
So
that
when
was
I was so I was like, oh, am I smart enough? Because you guys are awesome. So, but no, I'm just playing. I'm smart enough. I know I am. But no, but seriously, you guys are an awesome group of people. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank
It's
you.
great to
yes,
be
very
here.
much for having us. Thanks for
yes.
having us.
Big welcome. That was perfect timing, actually.
It was. It was.
So Donnie laid the initial foundation. As we were saying in the green room, I was really surprised by how many people had never heard the term Black Loyalist before, or even realizing that that was a part of American history. I don't know who would like to take this question first, or if you can all three give, I guess, your different viewpoints on it. How, for someone who has never heard the term Black Loyalist, how would you describe who they were?
Go, Andrea.
Thank you, Kelley. Thank you, John. Thank you, Danya and Brian and audience for having us here tonight. I'm expressly happy that we get to speak about this. I just came off of a genealogy lecture yesterday, so this really leads into today's conversation as well. So I'm so glad to have done that. Um, People don't know about the Black Loyalists because I believe that part of history is untold, and it's almost as though it's still yet to be discovered. And I believe that the biggest part of it is finding the authentic information about who the Black Loyalists were and what their story was. And I think that's where I think the biggest struggle comes from. As the executive director of the Black Loyalist Heritage Center, I get an opportunity to speak to schools in the United States and to speak to schools locally and continue to inform them of who the Black Loyalists were. And I always like to say they were loyal to Britain, to the crown, with the promises of freedom. And that loyalty was strong. And today, if you go into a workplace and you ask, loyalty or trust, what is more important? I mean, in the case of the Black Loyalists, it was loyalty. There may have been some skepticism about freedom because, hey, that's just seemed too easy, to gather it. But the Black Loyalists that did come to Nova Scotia, not some of them were free as well. Just to let you know, they didn't all come with promises of freedom. Some of them were free. And a lot of them were indentured, so they were put back into slavery even after they got here, and those promises were broken, by the crown. So they escaped. They escaped enslavement by their patriotic masters, and they served on the side of the crown. And I think it's important that we bring out that information, that untold story, and we talk about it a lot more to connect the Africans, the people of African descent, to the entry points in Nova Scotia.
Mm-hmm. And Kelley, as another direct descendant, what would you like to say?
Oh gosh, well, Andrea handled that very, very well. As I said earlier, the story of the Black Loyalists obviously begins, with the American Revolution, but we, as people that grew up in Nova Scotia, really didn't pay a whole lot of attention to that. Our history, even in our own history books, didn't talk about the Black Loyalists, and we weren't taught a lot about what happened in terms of what was going on in the United States. So when we were provided with the opportunity to build a center and to put a society together and have something that was just so focused on taking the Black Loyalist story and teaching it and bringing it out into our own communities, it was absolutely fabulous. But what we're missing, again, is that story that takes us down into the United States and tells us where we were and who we were before we actually landed on the shores of Birchtown Bay in a very cold and remote, part of North America. So that's kind of what the center means to us. There's so much work to be done. There's so much more of that story to be told.
So are we looking at researching the history of just men, or were there women who were part of this history as well?
Go, Andrea.
Not only were there women, there were children as well. And so that's something that has been forgotten as well, or untold, was the fact that there were women and children. And children, I believe at the young age of 8 or 10, were put into slavery, around that age. And so that's that's just part of the story that connects us as a family. So when you think about the Black family or the Black Loyalist family at that time, it would have comprised of, a mother, a father, aunts, uncles, and children. And so I think that we forget that. And it takes me back to, and I know nothing about American history, very little, but you think about separation of family and you think about how that would have had an impact on communities and on families at that time. So definitely men, women, and children. More predominantly men, likely because they were the leaders of their homes, but the women were strong forces as well, and that's a whole other chapter we could talk about.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about the best way of phrasing the next question, because I can imagine that the African descended people were coming from pretty much the length and breadth of the eastern seaboard. So I'm familiar with people who left with the British from South Carolina, North Carolina, and Virginia. But you, if I remember correctly, Kelley and Andrea, you actually descend from people who left from New York. Just how widespread was this kind of leaving with the British?
That's a really good question.
It's a great question, and John can pipe in at any time because of his
Yeah.
extensive, research. I
Mhm.
mean, by all means, John,
Well,
would you like to?
John, would you like to take it?
So yeah, pass the puck. I think what I've uncovered so far, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life researching Black Loyalist history. But what my understanding. So, for example, Kelley's direct descendant, Joseph Hartley, 1783, and he's from Virginia, but he comes to Nova Scotia on the brig Elijah, which Brian at the International African American Museum, I know that Elijah was there transporting people out of South Carolina as well, and I was fascinated by that, right? But time didn't allow us to do any in-depth research, so the purpose of our trip was to make new friends, such as yourself and today Danya. I think I think the Black Loyalists were people that came from all over the New England states that enlisted to fight against Washington. I think they were granted great promises of freedom and land in the states. Yet, as history shows, the British lost. And so it was, get out of Dodge really quickly. And so they came to Nova Scotia, they came to New Brunswick and settled those areas. And our research, as we discussed previously, our research is we're stuck at 1783 with Kelley's lineage, Andrea's lineage, all the way back to their arrival. But we don't know where they came from exactly, right? And so that's the new challenge. The story, as we had a discussion while we were visiting with you, Brian, was, there's an intersection in history where the Black people, Black slaves, intersect 1783. They left your world and they came to ours, and we're trying to find out where did they come from, and you're trying to find out where they went, because we're all, the families are, have some relation there as well. So there's a story to tell, and it's a big one. And for us, we're really, really excited. And I can't tell you how humble and honored I am to be able to work with the center in Birchtown to try to advance the story through existing documentation, right? I want the story to be told, and it's a true story based on hard evidence.
Cool. And before I pivot back to Andrea and Kelley, John, I'm curious because you had a population of Caucasian colonials who also left with, who either fought with the British, they chose to fight with the British, or they left with the British. And now we're speaking about African descended people who did the same thing. So when they got to Canada, were black and white, I guess, loyalists is what we would call them. Were they living together? They had, there was a bizarre common bond there. That's what I'm trying to get at. They had come through a similar ordeal. They may have had very different experiences in in the British colonies, but they left. They left their home, their families, their land, everything that they knew, or in Africans, some of them, their enslavement. I'm just wondering if that common bond kind of cemented something between them and they built a community, or was it like the States where the Caucasian loyalists kind of stuck with themselves, and the African loyalists were made to stick with themselves.
Mm.
Yeah, so I'll tell you a quick story. As fate would have things. So my ancestor is an Empire Loyalist. 1782, landed in Port Roseway, which is now Shelburne. 1782. James Nowlan is his name. He left Ireland via Britain to join the British forces in the New England states in the Revolutionary War. Don't believe he was there for very long, and he was part of the exodus to Nova Scotia, and didn't spend, from what we can tell, he was not very long in Shelburne either. I think the experience that we have seen anecdotally through stories from the center is the Empire Loyalists were the first to give in land grants, were the first to be settled, and the Black Loyalists were years later provided with land settlements in Birchtown and so on. And the Black Loyalists during that period, I believe it was 3 years or so after their arrival, were living in absolutely horrendous conditions. Whereas all the Empire Loyalists, were being looked after. Plots of land divided, streets built, construction happening in the city, in the center of Shelburne.
Yeah.
So it was two completely different realities in 1782, 83, 84 through 85, 86. Right, and some of that led to the race riots that I'm sure Andrea will have the opportunity to talk about. But the realities were completely different for both societies, for lack of a better word.
Okay, so it sounds as though one group got a lot of support, and another group got, well, we said we were going to free you, you're free, so now you can just kind of pull yourself up by your bootstraps and get on with it. Is that kind of a fair summation of the two realities?
I would say,
Yeah.
yeah, yes, that's a fair description, and well said, John. And I think we need to remember about these, the slave trade, and it was based on the economy. And so when you think about it, when the loyalists, and they both had the term loyalist, so you have your United Empire or white loyalists, and then you have your black loyalists. And so, as John was saying, the difference being in the fact that there was less provisions or land entitlements or grants or whatever it was to the black loyalists, less significant, less important.
Yeah.
And as John alluded to, when they came to Shelburne, and then when the race riots happened about a year later, where they took up arms, it was based on it was motivated by the economy, and the black loyalists were, accepting less wages than the white loyalists, and so of course that caused an issue. And as a result of that, as John had said there, for 10 days they pushed the black loyalists to Birchtown, and Birchtown would be determined as the most unnavigable arm of the harbor. So by pushing them back to that arm of the harbor, you couldn't get a ship in there. You couldn't get supplies in there. You couldn't get things out from there. So it came to the point where this is where you are. This is where you will stay. And, stop taking our jobs, and you're not going to work for less than we are. And the economy was the biggest reason, behind the slave trade. So as John
Yeah.
summed it up absolutely correctly. And lack of I guess, follow through with the promises. Imagine to put you on the roughest, darkest, rockiest piece of property or territory, in Shelburne. But just to take a little further, there were both white and black loyalists who did suffer, and I say that in a way to say that there was poverty for everyone, in regards to even entitlements of land and whatnot. But it was the hardest hit on the black loyalists.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And to follow up on that, Andrea and John, so when we talk about Shelburne and we talk about Birchtown is miles outside of that town. So those folks that were working in the town for the lower wages that Andrea has just said, were walking sometimes 15 miles to get to work in the morning,
Oh,
15 miles
wow.
at night to get home. So to give them a piece of land that was not good for farming, when were they going to have the time in the run of a day to be able to work their land, plus be able to get up in the morning and travel back and forth for the meager wages that they were making? So everything was set up to have them fail. When they first arrived, it was in the middle of winter, so these people were not used to snow and cold and having to survive in a climate that was just completely inhospitable with no accommodation. So tough,
You know,
really,
def-
really, really tough times.
definitely challenging. And because our audience loves origin of discovery stories, Kelley, I'm going to start with you first, and then I'm going to pivot to you, Andrea, afterwards. So if you can talk a moment about the moment you realized that you are actually a descendant of African American loyalists.
Yeah. Well, my skin is lighter, so that's the first thing that I will say. And people, when they look at me, don't realize that I do have African descent. However, I was raised in the Black community in Shelburne. So all of my people and my aunts, uncles, we all kind of lived on the same street for both sides of the family. We're Bruces and Hartleys and Jacquelines. We all our cousins and everybody were together, and we were kind of a rainbow of people. So we kind of took that for granted. And as I said, in the history books, when we went to school, there was nothing written about the Black Loyalists. There was nothing talking about our ancestry. There was nothing saying that Bruces and Hartleys were descendants of these amazing people who came up and started their life, the way that they did. So for me, it just became evident in the people that I was surrounded by. And as I, came through my life in Shelburne, a very, very small town, people made you understand that you were a part of a different community. Whether your skin was a certain color, they looked at your mama and your dad, and they looked at your grandmothers and grandfathers, and they knew who everybody was ahead of you. So that was important to me. And it was important for me to fight for who I was and what my identity was, regardless of how my skin color made it look different. I am.
Mhm.
I am of African descent, and that is first and foremost who I am. So
Because
that's
you,
that's what made it important to me.
because Donnie, I feel you have a comment, but I just wanted to jump in. I just wanted to jump in really quickly. I know my cousin. I know my cousin Carlos really well. I can see it on your
Yeah,
face.
you can.
Um, because you were very kind. Because Kelley, you were very kind to share that with me when we visited at the museum. Because I was really shocked because coming from an American background, the way I was always told was that Canada was very chilled about race. And when you were describing that to me, it really sounded like the one drop rule that we're all familiar with in the United States. It sounded just like that.
Oh, it's here. Yeah. Yeah. Especially in small towns, people know who you are. They know exactly who you are. And they expect you not to. When I was growing up, they would have expected me not to want to be a part of the Black community. Like, there's still that thing about, well, you can pass or you can. That was never who I was. My parents and my ancestors were not about that. I grew up in a poor community where we all pulled together and we looked out for each other. It was never my life experience was never brought up in a white community. So it's a dichotomy. People will see me and they are shocked, and they're also kind of astonished that that's what I would lead with, but that's really, really who I am. And sometimes I've had to fight for that identity. People will challenge me. Well, you don't look, or who's your mom, or show me pictures, and I'm thinking, who are you to be even asking me to do this when I know exactly who I am? So
Oh
yeah,
my
so
God.
I get the shock, and I get but it's big.
Wow. So, okay. All right, I'm here. I'm ready now. Let me tell you something. So, okay, Kelley, because Andrea, I'm gonna come to you. But Kelley, that is amazing. First and foremost, thank you. So, I feel funny even saying this, but thank you. Because you're literally fighting for who you are,
Yeah,
and it's probably one of the most beautiful things that I've sat here to hear in the 7 seasons that we've done.
thank
Thank
you.
you,
Well, and thank
because
you.
because I didn't know until I read your bio that you're black. I'm gonna
Yep,
say it. That you're black,
there it
and
is. Yeah,
and this is not the chick that was pretending to be black when
no,
that young lady that was trying to be black or whatever. You really are. You're a black woman with lighter skin, and you still have to fight for it. So that means that you actually went through a particular type of racism
yep,
that most people don't go through.
and still
So
do, and
and
still do.
still
And I'm
do.
not the
So
only one.
that's amazing to me. But with that being said, on Andrea, how does that make you feel? Like, where is your thought process in having to be a part of knowing that this woman somewhere down the line, she might be your cousin, but she still experienced a certain thing that you experience, and you carry a darker skin.
You hit the nail right on the head. And Kelley and I are related, as a matter of fact. I recently found that out, and I'm not sure when Kelley found that out. And I understand where Kelley is coming from with having that lighter skin. Growing up with darker skin in the community was also a challenge. Africans most were darker skinned people. That tended
And
to kind of wade off or wane off throughout the years here in Shelburne. And so when I was growing up with the darker skin, um, I didn't feel comfortable because I didn't know I was African. I didn't know that the blood of Africa was running through me. My parents never talked about it. The schools, the teachers, the community never talked about it. Hence, it be through maybe because of traumatic reasons or because of lack of information.
mm,
Um, but it is something that connects this community, and that is the fact that we are mixed. A lot of us are interracially mixed here in the community, and it, uh, it stands out for me. And part of the reason why I left, Shelburne when I graduated high school was because of the color of my skin. I didn't feel that there was a place for me here. I looked around and I didn't see anyone that looked like me, that had my skin color. And so for me, I felt I've got to go. I've got to go find that community and find that identity to seek that out because I wasn't getting the answers that I needed here. There's
yeah,
also another thing to your, and Kelley said we were all poor. We were poor. Absolutely, we were poor. But
yeah,
sometimes, depending on your last name in the community, you suffered a little bit more than maybe other people with
yeah,
also a black name. And so,
yeah,
a lot of people, when they see you, they want to, especially in the community or new to the community, they say, "What is your last name?" And based on your last name, they get to predetermine the way you were brought up and where you were brought up and how you were brought up. And so that is a big stigma that we face in this community. Albeit the color of your skin is I mean, we know, Kelley and I know, we could look at someone and we almost can tell that they have that drop, that's
yeah,
it,
yeah.
right?
That's right.
But I think it's they are the ones who don't know that or don't care to know or don't want to talk about it. So therefore, I think our greatest survival for us is extinction. And so we need to make sure that we get the story out and that we tell people in the community it doesn't matter what the color of your skin. It's also about what runs through your body. I recently did my DNA, and Kelley and John know this. I mean, it doesn't matter what color skin you have. When you have Irish in you, you have Irish in you, and I do. I have a percentage of my blood that popped up as the highest percentage as being Irish, and so then you're thinking, oh, what is this? I need some answer. Some answers to my questions. And so I think it's more, and Kelley is absolutely right. There's stigmas attached to even the placement of your home, where you lived in a marginalized community, because we had them here in Shelburne. One thing that I will pride Shelburne on is the fact that back in the 50s that there was a blended school system. The black and the white students went to school together in Birchtown. And
Yeah.
we can talk about that another time, but that is a whole other article that was done by us at the center about the old school that talks about how we were integrated in the school system. One of very few in Nova Scotia during that time. So that's a very proud moment for all of us.
Yeah.
But you know what? I eventually found out that my skin is not my sin. It's been my privilege all along. It's been my strength. It's been my story. And I get to be, as Kelley knows, the face and leadership of the Black Loyalist Heritage Society and the community as well. So I'm honored.
Cool. Well, I'm
Yeah.
slowly segueing into the museum and community center, but before I do that, um, Andrea, if you can talk a little bit about the records and the resources that you access to learn about this part of your ancestry.
I could talk a little bit about that, but I know if I was to bounce it over to John and Kelley, they have done so much work on it as well.
Mhm.
But we also had a lady in our community who has since passed away who put in a lot of work, doing our genealogy within the community of Shelburne. And that person, as I stated, has since passed away. So some of those records we're still trying to find, navigate, get our hands on them. A lot of records we did lose, Brian, in a fire, an arson back in 2006. So a lot of the records were not salvageable. And so we almost had to start from scratch. But there are a lot of people in the community that we rely on for oral history. So we will go to our elders and our community members. We'll ask them, questions, and they'll tell us stories. For me, I did not know that I was an eighth generation descendant until I actually, it was a lady that I did an article with the New York Times last year, or a year and a half ago. She told me that I was an eighth generation descendant. I did not know that at the time. And it's just surprising because had I have been equipped with that information, I think that maybe my life would have changed a little bit. I would have been maybe stronger. I wouldn't have left. Maybe I would have stayed here and continued to do what I do. But at least I wouldn't have these questions that I have today.
Yeah.
And what are some of those questions that you have today? Like for both of you, for all three of you for that matter. I mean, like, with everything that's going on in today's world, because you guys are just as affected being in Canada that we
Yeah.
have going on here in the United States with all of the race issues that are happening, the stuff that's happening into politics. Like, how is this affecting the two of you, the three of you, in what's going on today? Like, what are your questions? How do you address them?
Yeah. Well, I'll take a crack at it first. It's so when we look at who we are, we know that we are from the United States, and our ancestors are also back as far as Africa from when we first came. So you're not, as you said, Donya, we're not so dissimilar. We are one part of one big family where there's a border or there is not. I think the biggest question for us, and certainly for me as I get older, is that I want to know. I want to know where Joseph Hartley came from and what his family was about. I want to know who, what his story is. I have children now. I have grandchildren that I want to be able to say, here's who you are. We're putting together a family tree so that our people don't have to go back and do all of that work. They know, and they have it in their DNA, but they also have it right there in their hands. So when we did the travel that we did this summer, we went down to North Carolina and South Carolina, and we found out that a lot of the records that most people would have in civic history and in government history isn't the same. Like, my people are back as far as being on a plantation. They're back as far as being slaves. And I worry that those records are going to be gone before I'm able to see them, or I'm able to stand on the same land as Joseph Hartley to say, I'm here. I get it. I know where you came from. You will always now be a bigger part of me. So those are the things I think about. Those are the questions that I have. And how do we get access to those records? We went to Colonial Williamsburg, and we had absolutely beautiful people that took us in and talked about genealogy. And then we were introduced to this library that just housed so much information. And I looked at it and said, where in God's name do we even start? We need experts around us to walk us through that amount of information. And I know somewhere in there is my ancestor and ancestors. It's not Joseph Hartley, it's Joseph's mother and father and grandfather, and then where did they all come from? So, the bigger question would be, that's the question. Who am I? Where did I come from? And how can I put my hands on him? Like most people are able to do. John's family, he's a French Catholic, and these people kept records in their families back as far as 1300s, and he can go back there. It's hard for me to find my people. It's hard for Andrea to find her people, especially when you go down into the United States.
The way it's grabbing me when she say it's hard for me to find my people, like that, the fact that that she understands, like I already know Andrea gets it. I already know she gets it, and maybe I know she gets it because she's my complexion. But to look at you and to hear you say that, and just to look at you, and I'm like, why is this lady saying this? What is hard? But in this, so for a new person that's coming on that may not have heard this, it's the weirdest thing. I'm a straightforward, I'm an honest person, and I'm gonna keep it real with you. It's the weirdest thing.
And then poor Kelley in South Carolina is standing in my office. Come to find out that she actually has South Carolina, not just South Carolina roots, but Charleston County. You were standing in a place associated with your ancestors.
Right there. And trust me, it felt every minute, felt every vibration. All of it was right there. And it's like, I'm here. And so close.
And there's me telling
into the museum, Brian. I have one more question because it was actually kind of listed on our comment section. And what
I just wanted to get this in. I just wanted to get this in really quick because it follows on what we just said. And then to tell both Kelley and John about enslavers in the American colonies who were actually suing the Canadian government and creating lists of enslaved people who went with the British during the Revolutionary War. Because I don't think you had even heard of those at that point. And for the audience, you can actually get those lists and those petitions and those suits against Canada at the library, at the National Archives in DC. And I have to say, I did like the Canadian response. I knew it was the British and they were feeling salty towards Americans anyway, but they're like, we like your gumption, but nah, we're not sending anybody back. They stay here.
So sorry. And what you're saying, Brian, is going right towards what I was going to ask because I like that we mesh like this because I just do. But the thing is that the movie, The Book of Negroes, because you guys missions, you guys are all into that, and then Andrea, you have a descendant that was listed in that book. How is it, was any of your family members, did they ever travel to Liberia? Was any of them that traveled to Liberia? Do you know that? And then also, what was your feeling when you realized that the British was like, we gonna pay them for doing this. We gonna give them reparations for allowing y'all to just come on over to Nova Scotia as opposed to sending y'all back. Like that was a whole thing. Yeah. So where do you guys stand with all of that? How do you feel? How did it make you feel?
Well, I think
Liberia and that.
I'm not too sure of the Liberia connection, but it's great. I've written it down here so that I can follow through with that. But I think what needs to be known worldwide is the strength of the Scotians, those that came to Nova Scotia, those Africans that came, or Americans that came to Nova Scotia. They were a force to be reckoned with. And yes, in 1792, they did take an exodus back to Sierra Leone, but not all of them did. My family didn't. Hartley's, Bruce's, a lot of the other Black families did not. So we stayed here. The families stayed here. And that's why we're here. Because I always say they were not meant to survive, but they did, because Kelley tells her story. I tell my story, as well as the other descendants that are here. And from my knowledge, I have two family members or ancestors from the Book of Negroes. So one is Jupiter Farmer, and Venus Farmer. I'm not sure if they're well-known names of those that came to Port Mattoon here in Shelburne on the Diana. And then there is Titus Milliner as well, who was another person from the Book of Negroes. But I just want to throw something out there to let you all know just how far how serious we are at the Black Loyalist Heritage Society. We are going to request, demand, whatever we need to do, that Britain return the Book of Negroes, the original Guy Carleton papers, to Birchtown, where those papers belong. Right now, they're sitting in a museum in Kew, England, behind a door, in a box, no access to the public. It feels to me like this is a big project to be taken on. We may or may not succeed. We will start off maybe with a loan of those documents, but I think the king seems to be in a pretty good mood these days with the returning items to other museums. So we want to slip in there in his DMs, as they call it. We want to slip in there and we want to make that request that those papers come home, because those Carleton papers, Book of Negroes, belong home here in Birchtown for our people to see them, so that we can see our ancestors on paper with that particular version of the Book of Negroes. So that's a big feat, but it's something that we are working on. We've got several projects on the go. That's just one of many. So we're hoping that your group here will support that. So if we reach out to you, maybe to look for some type of support, that you'll be able to stand behind us on that and write history, because this is a part that we can have an opportunity to do some right from that wrong that took place.
Yeah.
Thank
Well
you.
said.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because I keep forgetting that is at Q.
It is at Q, yes. The British version is at Q, and then there's an American version, I believe, somewhere in Washington or something like that. But we want the British version, because that was the version. It was a bit of a back and forth between the two when, they were writing down the names and descriptions, but we would like to have that version. It's serving no purpose, but except for economically. I'll go back to the economy again. As long as Britain holds on to it, I don't know what, money they're getting from that. But there's always this, if we let it go, it's a large part of our museum or artifact catalog that, we don't have anymore. So we're delicately trying to get as many societies and organizations involved to bring those papers home. It's the turn of the times, and that's what needs to happen. And the time is now. Yeah.
So going to the first iteration of the museum, one thing I would like to say is Kelley and John did a wonderful job in showing in pictures just how small where you live is, what a small population of people there were, and kind of how remote. You're in a very remote part of Canada, a very remote part of Nova Scotia. I wish I could use other words just to convey that to the remote people. Think remote. It is such a shame that the first museum was the victim of an arson attack, which was due to racism. But more to the point, because if I remember correctly, that was a school that was used historically as a school for Black children. Was that correct? The original museum, the one that burned.
No, I think it was our administration offices that
Oh,
burned,
okay.
and the school was intact. Yes.
Got it. That's good. But you did suffer artifact loss and record loss in that attack, which is unfortunate. When did you break ground on that version?
Kelley, can you remember when? I know it opened in 2015, maybe in 2000. Maybe they broke ground, and then through donations. I just did a piece on it the other day. But I know the new center, as it stands now, it's a world-class building. It's fantastic, and that particular building opened in 2015.
Okay.
Yeah.
To the public.
And for a small remote place, did they ever catch the arsonists?
They know. They knew.
That is a long story. It's a legal matter. It's not before the courts or anything, but it would take probably another session to talk about that. It was someone from the community. That person was never convicted
Right.
Mm.
of the crime.
So now you have a new museum, which is a beautiful building. I mean, I just love the creativity and the thought and the planning that went into it. Um, I can't remember if we have any images of it to show, but what I thought was really clever was how you've protected the artifacts that are on display. Not all of them, but you have them under this clear floor, and I just thought that was such an ingenious way of doing it.
Yeah. It's so ingenious that you can't get under the floor to remove the artifacts. That's how safe it is. And I say that because during the recent wildfires that we had here in Nova
Oh
Scotia,
yeah.
I'm quite sure you heard about those. So
Hmm.
our job as the society was to protect those artifacts in the building and the records and whatnot. So we were prepared, and we did go in and we did remove several artifacts that were attached to the wall. So they were in cases. So we were able to move those and ship them off for safekeeping. But the ones under the floor, we had no access to, which is not a good thing. But what came out of that is recommendations for us to change that so that
Yeah.
we now will be able to make an opportunity to go in there and remove those artifacts for those reasons.
Well,
Yeah.
I can kind of forgive me when you guys were sitting down doing your risk matrices. I'm sure you did not have or think about wildfires.
No,
No?
no, we certainly didn't. But as you said, we are remote. We're very rural. So we're rural even to like the small towns. As we said, we're like 15 miles out. So yeah, it's one of those things that could possibly happen. Wildfires, especially now, it's definitely a risk. Yeah, but we
Again,
handled it, didn't we, Andrea? We handled
We
it really
handled it.
well.
Yes.
Got the boots on the ground.
Yeah.
but again, what I really love about the building is it's colorful, it's light. The artifacts, at least the ones that I have seen in the pictures, are just amazing, just amazing. And it's great to be able to capture that kind of lost, unspoken, I'm not going to say forgotten, but just that lost and unspoken connection between Canada and the United States.
Yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah. I
So we
think one of
got
the most,
I want to get a couple of questions in before from our audience. One person asked Bernice, not Bernice. Shelley, Dr. Shelley Murphy, she asked, will DNA be an option to research for descendants as far as from Nova Scotia? Is that something that is possible to do? Either one of you.
I'll leave that up to John and Kelley because they're highly involved in ensuring that we get this DNA stuff off the ground. So I'll let them cover that question.
Mhm.
yeah.
So
Well, I'll kind of
yeah,
take it. Sorry, John.
okay.
So when the group of individuals who fought to get the second museum built and off the ground, there were a lot of um, really, I guess, just passionate people who were able to get lots of good funding. We went into our Nova Scotia Power Corp, and that tends to be one of the bigger sponsorship organizations here in Nova Scotia. So lots of people put a big influx of money into this. And one of the asks and one of the goals of the organization was to have a DNA testing center. And this was way back before DNA was like Ancestry, or you could just go and get your, put whatever it is into Ancestry DNA and get your DNA back. So it was a really big ask. So it was something that our four people wanted to have done, but it's complicated. It's not something that you can just say, okay, we'll just take this organization. It requires a lot of money. It requires a lot of research. You have to have the right people doing the right things, and it's hugely, hugely expensive. So would we like to do it? Yes. Will it happen probably in the next 10, 15 years? Probably not, unless somebody leaves us a whole pile of money to be able to get that going.
Mm.
Mhm.
Yeah, I just
And
wanted to add. I just wanted to add really quickly, Brian. Um, so we're in a state of, I guess, where we want to evolve the center in its service models and what it offers. So the research center aspect of things, unfortunately, when the local genealogist passed away, you come to the realization that there's a whole bunch of research and information that ended up in one person's hands. And now we're struggling to try to find it. So a centralized research center at Birchtown, at the Black Loyalist Heritage Center in Birchtown, is the next logical step, right? To celebrate all the families, to celebrate the history, to honor the strong women and men that Kelley and Andrea come from, and all the local families as well. And it takes it out of John's hands. It takes it out of anybody's hands, but it gives it a home where people, much, like you guys are doing in South Carolina, it gives it a home where, people can come and do some further research and bring some ideas. And I invite your audience, we're trying to jump over the fence from 1783. If anybody knows of any resources that we can tap into, that's my mission in life now, is to try to bring history that was not taught in Nova Scotia, is to try to bring that history to life in the center itself, right? So that the center can be a teaching instrument.
I have a suggestion for you. In terms of research, have any of you three tried to track down the ship manifests and the ship logs in the British Admiralty?
So that I want to speak to that for just a moment, because I didn't get around to advising you of what questions I have as a descendant of the Black Loyalists, and that was actually one of them. I recently reached out to a historian from Halifax to get that information about those 15 ships that even went from Halifax to Sierra Leone. And it seems to be that information is hard to find. And even Nova Scotia Archives doesn't have everything that we would like for them to have. So not only are we looking, but we're also looking to supply, the archival system with that information as well. So those ships have always been of interest, to me. And also, who built the ships. I know that there were several that came out of Newfoundland and other parts of Canada that we don't talk about. And I would like to let you know that shipbuilding in Shelburne was one of the most lucrative businesses here at one point. And our Black community, which we would call the African Nova Scotia seafarers, were men who actually worked in that industry. And next month, in the month of February, we are launching an exhibit. It's called a movable exhibit. And we're going to be able to share information on the African Nova Scotia men who were in that industry, who have been forgotten about, because in Canada it's looked upon more of either an Indigenous or a white person's industry. But the black men and the Black Loyalists were fishing long before any of them. That was their livelihood. That was their means of feeding their family. And so
building the ships.
That's right, and building the ships and learning to do blacksmithing and ironworks and all of that stuff. And the church that we have on premise now, if you look up the ceiling, it looks like the inside of the hull of a ship. That's the way the Black Loyalists built it, because that's how they would have learned and been taught by the British. But on the other hand, too, I just want to touch on the youth and education. I find that we need to make sure that we do not forget about them in terms of education, curriculum, in terms of the youth getting involved in the community when it comes to the Black Loyalists and the Black community, where we are, I guess, heavily waiting on them to kind of pick up what we're putting down and picking up where we're leaving off. Because without them getting involved, history may somehow tend to get around to repeating itself. But one very good thing coming out of this is that the people after us, Kelley, John, and I, when we're done this job in our little field, and we're going to continue doing it, but it's not going to be as much work for them as it is for us, because we're going to leave behind what we're collecting now, and we're going to digitize that information, and we're going to have it ready for them. So it's just a matter of educating.
Well, I just want to because the show we actually have run out of time, but
Oh no.
first and foremost, Andrew, Kelley, John, you guys just gave us another show idea. So look out for the Black Seafarers show, because it's going to happen. I'm just putting it out there.
Okay.
We've only been trying for 3 years. We've only been trying for 3
We've only been
years.
trying. You guys have now given it to us. So, yeah,
Mhm.
that's the next show. We're going to be working on that one with you guys. Secondly, as far as the education is concerned, that's what our next show is going to be about. Someone who actually wrote a book about pulling in the youth to pick up and start getting involved in things like this. But there are some questions up here. I do want to make sure you guys get them. I will send them to you, but I want to thank you so much for being on the show and just for being just so straightforward and coming
Mhm.
straightforward with everything that you've said and just learning. This was definitely probably one of the best openers for Black History Month that we've ever done.
Great.
7
Great.
seasons, and I'm yeah, this is probably one of the best ones. This
And
yeah.
again,
Thank you.
just thank you for speaking your truth. I'm just going to quickly say, if any of those ships involved in your history were British military ships, I would absolutely make the British Admiralty Archives in Richmond. Sorry, not
Okay.
Richmond, Greenwich,
Greenwich.
your port of call. Because obviously, you know, what the British administration were like, they kept meticulous records.
Yes.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, and I hope that
Lovely.
yields something for you. But again, as always, just thank you for joining us. Thank you for speaking
Thank
your
you.
truth. And I hope our audience comes away with this with some new knowledge.
Yes,
Us
yes.
too. Us
Don't
too.
hang up. Don't hang up. So again, guys, you know, Black History Month has started for the Genealogy Adventures team, and we will be speaking with Angelique uh, Nelson next week. She wrote the book For the Culture, a genealogy handbook for the cool kids. It's cute. I love it. It's
I
great.
love
It's
it.
really for people 12 to 19 and inviting them and teaching them how to research your family, how to go about doing this and getting them involved. So I want you guys to really, really, you know, we are serious about our Black History Month. I love the education piece that you guys just said, and just don't hang up. But I want to
Mhm.
thank everybody for joining us today. I am Danya on this cold, rainy day, but I'm
I am
Danya.
I am Brian on this not so cold sunny day. And thank you as always for spending this hour with us, and we'll see you next week in all the usual places, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Until then, have a blessed Sunday.
Love
Yes,
you all.
bye for now.
Bye bye.
You
Bye bye.
guys stay on.
Okay.